with the materials that we have. And then if we look at the methods, it's really important in this section, right, to describe how you've studied the problem. It should be done in a way that it's reproducible. So let's say I'm an expert within the same field. I should be able to follow the steps within the article that have been described, and I should be able to come to the same conclusions as you, as the researcher and the author, have reached. It's important, of course, also to identify, right, equipment that's been used and the materials that have been used, because of course there can be differences. There will be differences in equipment, and not all equipment will lead to the same outcome. So there can be some variety there. And then, of course, it's also important to not describe previously published procedures. You shouldn't be writing that in detail. You can reference those, right, or describe them in the supporting materials section. And then we go to the results section. So in this section, it's very important. The data of the paper is really the driving force, right, of the paper. And the figures and illustrations are really critical, and it's important that this is really your essential data. So any data that you have that is of less importance, right, of secondary importance, should be put into supporting or supplementary materials section. Well, the legend that you use for a figure should be very brief. It should contain sufficient explanatory details to explain the figure without the need to refer to the text. And it's of course good to structure, to have a good logical structure here. So important, right, in the results section is include all of your illustrations, include only, right, the most important data, highlight these main findings within the notes, right, within the legend, and really make sure that the figures can basically, right, stand on their own in that sense that a reader doesn't have to go back into the text here. Well, it's also understanding within the field, and really focus again on making sure that discussion is really considerably, right, arguably the most important section of an article. So it's really where you interpret, and this is a good opportunity, right, to sell your data in a sense that it's important to make sure, right, that the discussion corresponds to your results, it complements the results, but it doesn't repeat the results. So really make sure that it's really, really good. It should compare your work to other published work and findings out there, and also, of course, work that is in disagreement with yours. So I think that's actually a very good opportunity to confront the other work, right? To have a comparison there, and to try and convince anyone that is reading your work that your research is, right, correct, or is better than the previous work. So a few things that are of importance here is to really make sure that you do not go beyond what your results can support, that you use quantitative descriptions in a sense that, right, it should be really specific expressions, and not expressions such as a higher temperature, a lower rate. Really do make that measurable and make sure that people can look it up. Do not introduce any new terms that you've not already defined within your paper, and also do not speculate, but always really make sure that it's factual. And I think that is very important for the discussion section. Conclusion, this is really to provide a justification of your work in a sense that it should explain how your work fits within the field and how it further advances the field. So how it will add to the scientific record that the journal is actually building. So this really ties in as well, right, with what was mentioned earlier about the role of publishers, the role of journals, and the preservation part. So really what is happening is that a journal is building this scientific record, and articles should not be repeating, right, findings, but ideally, we're moving in a direction where every paper really is aiming to come up with new findings, and all of these findings really advance the field. So it's good to provide a clear justification for how your work does this, and you can do this by, for example, indicating uses of your work, extensions, possible applications, right? And it's also good to suggest future experiments that could build on your work and point out perhaps relevant experiments that might or might not be underway already. Then the references. So yeah, this is of course very, very important, because this really, right, as mentioned earlier as well, it's not a good thing to rewrite in detail the work that is already out there. That's really something that we should do in the reference list. We should point to earlier research in this manner. So you should use this to cite the work that you've used, right, that you're basing your work on as well. Make sure to not include too many references. So really make sure, right, that it's only references that are very needed, that are essential. And the same goes for references to your own previous work. Really make sure to do this only in moderation. So really only the most essential ones. And yeah, it really is important to include references. Also, if you, for example, were to reuse parts of your own previous work. So let's say you want to refer to previous work and you reuse a figure, you reuse a part of a paragraph, make sure to put in the references, because there really is such a thing as self-plagiarism as well. Well, it's really good, right, to make sure that you have fully absorbed and understood the material that you've referenced. So don't just rely on excerpts or on isolated sentences. Really know and own your references. And yeah, make sure, of course, again, to check the guide for authors to make sure that the references are listed in the proper format. And this really, really helps a lot also for the editors, and it will increase your chances, again, to introduction is really it is aimed to provide the context for your manuscript and to convince readers, once again, why your work advances a field or of study. It's important to be concise, so don't say anything more. Right? Don't say something in 5 sentences that you can say in 1 sentence. And yeah, it's really important, right, to that you really introduce some of the main publications that your work is really based on. Cite some original and important work here, but don't turn it into a history lesson, really. So yeah, really make sure to make once again to only have very relevant references here. So things that you want to do in the introduction is that you make sure that you clearly address the main problem that you're trying to solve, that you identify possible solutions and limitations, are there solutions, right? What would be the best solution? What is the limitation? Provide a perspective as well that is consistent with the journal that you're submitting to. One very, very important thing as well is really to make sure that you do not reuse any introductions that you've used previously. Every introduction should really be original. Then really the title. And the title, of course, as mentioned earlier, is really one thing that's really, really important in the indexation process and making sure that your paper can be found. I've used the title here by Professor Takaya. And what I really like about it is that it's short, it's extremely concise, and everyone really knows what this paper is about. And these are, yeah, really, really important things for any title, actually. So it's it should attract attention. It should be really concise. It should be specific. Shouldn't be using any technical jargon out there. So really, really make sure that anyone would be able to interpret that. That has a bit of a background and an interest in the field. And it should be really appropriate for the audience. And yeah, it's very important also, once again, for the initial readers, which are really the editors and the possible reviewers. And I do know that editors and reviewers, they don't like titles that do not make a lot of sense or do not accurately represent the subject. So the abstract is really, yeah, it should be really short. It's always freely available in abstracting and indexing services such as the Web of Science, PubMed, Medline, Embase, and Scopus. And it's really a single paragraph in general. So what it should do is be a summary of the problem, the methods, the results, and the conclusion. And yeah, it should be quite clear. It should be easy to understand, and it should be a bit of an appetizer, I should say, for a reader to want to read more about this. You should really try and encourage, right, and excite the editor and the reviewers to want to read the paper and to get to know more and to be curious about the findings that are presented. And yeah, it's in a way it's comparable, I would say, to a good movie trailer, or perhaps to a letter that goes with an application. Of course, it's completely different, but it's something that we would want to encourage someone, right, to want to know more, to want to read more, and to want to have them continue reading. And it really, really is important in increasing the chances of getting published. Keywords are basically labels or tags for your manuscripts that are really helpful in indexing and abstracting, also, of course, in search engines. And what you should try to do is avoid words with very broad meanings. So if a meaning is too broad and I do a search on Google or any search engine out there or in Scopus, I get way too many hits. So it's really also important to only use abbreviations that are very, very well established, such as DNA, but do not use any abbreviations that are not very well known, because that can lead to confusion. And some journals, it's also important to note, some journals have special requirements here. So for certain journals, they actually have a keywords list available. So important, once again, to check the guide for authors to see if this is a case, if this is the case for the journal that you want to submit your paper to. So as we can see in this example, right, some of the keywords here are forming, joining, plastic, deformation. And the index keywords here are forming, friction, stir welding, plastic deformation, product design, and yeah, it's really important. Once again, in trying to get your paper searchable, and that researchers can find it. Choosing the right journal. So, of course, very important. You want to have your research and your findings meet right with the journal. It should be in the journal that is most fitted. So really do make sure to pay a lot of attention to this by reading the aims and scope. And of course, right, one of the most important things about having the right journal is that you will reach the intended audience for your work. So if, for example, right, there's a paper on plastic deformation, and it's submitted to a journal on marine biology, of course, that's not really going to be of that, right? It's a silly example, but it's just to indicate how important this is. So important thing to know is to only pick one journal at a time. Simultaneous submissions are not allowed, and in most cases we find out editors will know, and in those instances, so if we find out, right, that a paper has been submitted to multiple journals at the same time, editors, right, and publishers as well will not really be happy, and it can have serious repercussions in a sense that a paper might be rejected, or when it's published, it could even lead to retraction in that sense. And it's just not good. So please do not do this. Do not gamble. Do not take the risk. Again, of course, your supervisor, your colleagues, based on the work that you've presented, right, that you've written, can really also surely come up with good suggestions. And a lot of publishers, such as Elsevier, also have tools available on the web. One of our tools, for example, is called the Journal Finder. What you can do there is really put in your title, put in your keywords, put in your abstract, and based on certain algorithms, you get candidate journals, right, possible journals for your research. But of course, do make sure to investigate them, to really focus on the aims, the scope, the earlier published work, the readership, and you know, the current topics that are published there. Also important to note, and I'm sure that this is not new to most of you, is that the articles, right, that you've used in your reference list can, of course, also give you a good indication of where you would like to publish your journal, your paper. So I want to end my part of the presentation of this webinar really with some final notes, and that's really on authorship and on best practices. So, right, authorship. On this slide, we have some of the principles for who is listed first. So first author is really the one that conducts or supervises the data analysis and the proper presentation and interpretation of the results. It's the one that puts the paper together and submits. Co-authors are really people that make intellectual contributions to the data analysis and interpretation. They review each paper draft, and they must be able to present the results, defend the implications, and of course discuss the study limitations at any point. Things really to avoid is ghost authors, so that's really leaving out authors that should be included, or really have scientific writers or gift authors, in a sense that, right, including people as an author that have not had significant contributions. Very, very important. Then the next slide really is, right, to follow up on this. So there's no one universal definition on authorship, but in general, right, it's basically, as I described earlier, one of the journals, one committee of medical journal editors has declared that an author really must adhere to these 4 points that are listed here. So there's really substantial contribution to the conception and design, acquisition of the data, or the analysis and interpretation of the data, and draft the article or revise it critically for important intellectual content, and give their approval, and of course agree to be accountable for all of the aspects that are described here or within the work, and of course the accuracy and integrity of any part of the work. So it's really important, right, to really make sure that anyone that is listed as an author meets this criteria. Any people, right, that do not meet this can be listed as acknowledged individuals, so really put them in the acknowledgement. Some of the key author responsibilities, really important as well. Report only real and unfabricated data. Make sure that your work is original, so that it's not plagiarized. Declare any possible conflicts of interest. And the conflict of interest here, of course, would be that you're doing research, right? But you have certain interests, either with a company or in any other way or form that can basically lead to a certain bias. And again, really make sure to only submit to one journal at a time. I also want to make clear that these are some of the most serious issues to avoid. So these are the 3 most common forms of misconduct that we see. And of course, right, papers are screened for this type of misconduct. And if any of these things is found within a submission, that's of course not. It can really have serious repercussions again. So the 3 most important and most seen forms of ethical misconduct are really fabrication. So it's really making up certain data, so you cannot really back it in a scientific manner. Falsification, so that you really manipulate certain data to fit certain trends, and plagiarism is really taking previous work or taking work, for example, by other authors that has not been published yet, and passing it off as your own. And it's really important to avoid these things. And finally, it's really this ties in with submitting to only one journal at a time. So it should be avoided where manuscripts describe essentially the same research and that they're published in more than one journal or primary publication. So that's really multiple or redundant publication in that sense. An author should avoid at any time to submit previously published articles, just in general, for consideration in any other journal. Duplication of the same paper in multiple journals or in different languages or of different languages should be avoided as well. And something that we refer to as salami slicing, which is really using the same research but turning it into multiple papers, is considered manipulative and also should be discouraged. It can really also, once again, lead to retractions. So that's, these are some final findings, some final important things that I wanted to share today. So this is really it for my part of the presentation, and I'm now going to hand over first to Johan and then to Professor Tekaya, of course. So thank you for
thank you so much, Timo, for sharing. Thank you. We already have quite a lot of questions in the Q&A, and I believe that more questions will be coming from our attendees. Yeah, and again, for our attendees, yeah, you can ask your questions using the Q&A box, yeah, which you can see in your Zoom. Okay. So again, thank you so much, Timo. Of course, you can take a look at the questions, and later on we will have the discussion with you as well. Okay, so now we are moving to Prof. Takaya. Yeah, so Prof. Takaya, you can start your session. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Can you see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Yeah, very good. Very good. I'm sorry, I just lost some faces here. Okay, good. I will start with my presentation by thanking for inviting me. This is a very nice opportunity for me and for all of you to get a little bit more acquainted with the issues of publishing. I'm thanking also to Timo. He made an excellent introduction to publishing, and I'm working with him for several years in different journals, and we know each other very well, and I know how much dedicated he is for academic publishing, and therefore I'm very happy to share the screen with him together today. So my presentation is about the research process and publishing a paper. I'm from the Dortmund University in Germany, and currently I am the editor-in-chief of the new journal Advances in Industrial and Gold and Manufacturing Engineering. That's a gold open access journal. And within my experience, I had also from my previous journal, GMPT, a journal for materials processing and technology, and also the CRP annals, which I chaired, where I chaired the scientific board there, editorial board there. I would like to give some points from my point of view as an editor. And with that, I would like to start with the research part. If you want to publish something, this should be based on good research. If you don't have good research, it doesn't matter how you make or write the paper, how nice you draw the figures, how good you format the paper, how nicely you reply to the editor. This will all not help. A good research which leads to an archivable publication is the fundamental issue, and I would like to talk a little bit about this. So my first point is, what are the steps of research? First of all, you have to determine the need for the research you are doing. So the question you have to ask yourself is, what do we need to know what is not known now? So you have to find the gap in the topic. Then you have to make a literature survey. What knowledge exists in order to answer the question related to the need? And if there is a difference between the literature and the need, that's the research gap. And that's the gap you have to fill with your research. The next step is to make a proposal how you are going to fill that gap. That means you have to think about a model, a solution technique, or experiment, or a system, how you will solve this knowledge gap. And after you have this proposal, you develop your solution, you develop your methodology, implement it. And then, most important, after you have done the implementation, you have applied your method, you have to evaluate. You have to evaluate, and for that purpose, you have to go back to the gap and see whether the results you achieved are filling the hypothesis to fill a gap, filled it, you have to check that. And you have to clearly make it to anyone who reads your paper. And finally, you can suggest further studies for the continuation of work, which is always good, showing that you are thinking in long terms and not for just a paper. Okay, so the golden rule is to start the study with the literature survey. I already said this, and in this sense, it is important to make a literature survey not only among your colleagues, not only in the last year. You have to find all the relevant papers, as Timo said very nicely. Okay, this is, in my eyes, the most important thing. In order to make an archival paper, you have to make a scientific contribution. And the question is, what is a scientific contribution? A scientific contribution can be threefold. It can be a novel work, a novel idea. I'm going to explain that in a minute. Plus, it must be deliver transferable knowledge. This is very important. And finally, it must have a scientific quality. That is, it must be based on physical laws, it must be based on analytical evaluation and thinking, and it should have no fakes. So let us look a little bit more deeper to novel work. What is novel work? Novel work could be a new theory. You can have a new theory which was not existing about a process and describe it. It can be a new technology, a new innovative technology, which includes a process or a machine or a tool or even materials. You can invent new materials, new composite materials. It might be also the application of existing theory to, or a technology to a new field. So you might take over a theory, for instance, the theory of plasticity, and apply it to a new process. That could be also a novel work. And finally, significant new knowledge that is applicable to different processes can be developed. So you can have a list of known processes, but for those processes, you develop a method by which you generate new knowledge, which is applicable for a whole batch of processes. So your research work should fulfill one of those items. The next point is, I said a good work should supply transferable knowledge. What could be transferable knowledge? It could be, for instance, for a manufacturing process. I'm a manufacturing researcher, so most of my examples are coming from manufacturing, but you can extend this to any other field. So it could be a working window for a manufacturing process. If you establish a working window for a manufacturing process, you have provided a transferable knowledge. You can quantify effects of process parameters experimentally, theoretically, or numerically. Quantitative properties of products. You can develop methods by which you can determine quantitative properties of products after manufacturing. That can be also experimental or numerical or theoretical. You don't need to have only a theoretical approach. You can have also an experimental approach to describe that. You can develop a theoretical model. That's the most condensed way of transferable knowledge. A complete process description, material properties, and applicable software, which can be used by several other people. And of course, there are many other items which you can think about among transferable knowledge. But this is a very basic issue. Why am I telling that to you? I'm telling that to you because as an editor-in-chief in my former journals and also in this journal, about 80% of the papers are rejected before I send them to any reviewer. We call that desktop projection. And the reason is that any of or one of those items is not fulfilled. So you should pay attention to this. Okay, so, and then if you have all that, you might have the wish to publish. And scientific publishing can have different purposes. One purpose is to distribute the knowledge acquired and hence contribute to the scientific development. I think this is one of the most important purposes. We would like to contribute to the level of science in the world. To obtain the rights on the novel contribution. So you have found something and you would like to have the rights. It's like a patent. A publication is like a patent on your ideas, on your work. To receive the comments of peers and improve your own work. And I just made that bold because this is very important. That's very much related to the journal to which you send your paper. So some of my students are very happy if they get no rejection and no comments from the reviewers. That's the wrong attitude. The peers, those people who know the subject, who know it maybe better than you, have to criticize your work, have to give you comments so that you can develop and your paper can develop and the whole community can get better feedback of your work. And of course, another item is to raise your own reputation. I mean, in the academic world, most of the promotions are based on publications and similar activities. And of course, as important to rise the reputation of your institution, your university, and your country. So in that sense, it's extremely important to select a journal, not making an easy review, to select a journal with a strong editorial board, with strong reviewers, and making a tough review so that you can improve your work at the highest level. So then the question is, what is a good paper? A good paper is a paper that makes that contribution, providing insight into the processes and material, and which can be used in the future by other people. And a good paper is a paper where the knowledge is transferable, coded in equations, formulated in concise statements, and supported by experiments and theoretical evidence. Remember, I said you have always to check your hypothesis by some discussion, and to check a mathematical model, to check a conceptual model can be done basically only by experiments, especially in mechanical engineering. So, and as Timo said very nicely, opinions are of little value. Don't use words by which you try to say, oh, I found an excellent result. The comparison was very good and very successful. This is something which comes not by your words, which comes by the results you show in the paper. Okay, with that, I would like to come to the scientific publishing in a little bit from a different viewpoint. I will touch all the points which Timo mentioned already, but from more an editor point of view. So the authorship I will skip because that has been very nicely listed by and explained by Timo. I just want to emphasize that the authorship is extremely important here. An important other thing is the cover letter. So let me tell you, the chief is a very busy person and he has little time to make judgments. And what the editor-in-chief is reading, the cover letter and the conclusions. So those are the four things we have to read in every paper. And therefore, it's extremely important to make those four items very concise, very solid. So one of those items is the cover letter. And what I see mostly is that many authors put in the cover letter the abstract of the paper. That's not the aim. You should emphasize the speciality of the paper, not the abstract. For instance, this is an example. Here, the author sent me a letter and he wrote, "This manuscript is unique." It is unique. So you have to emphasize that. And you have to say, why is it unique? And then he explained. Another example from another author. Here, he explains the relevance of the test. He developed a test and he wants to show why this test is so important. He doesn't write an abstract. He emphasizes the speciality of the paper. So he lists the 3 aspects of the paper. Here's another nice cover letter. So here the author wrote me, this manuscript describes a novel proposal, cutting a pattern in the undeformed blank prior to incremental sheet forming, etc. So he tries to make the editor interested in the topic. And this is also a nice cover letter because the author recognized that the paper was too long. So he wrote a review on the mechanics of spinning, and the paper was quite long. And usually editors do not like too long papers, but if there is you will notice that the paper is too long, but we have made a considerable effort to examine the literature in English, German, and Japanese. And by that, he explains, the authors explain the reason why the paper is so long. So then I'm coming to the sections Timo explained from the reviewer point of view. So if you write the introduction, which should have the items why we need the research work and what is the reason or what is the benefit for the practice and so on. So the reviewer can comment this section immediately from the negative point of view. This research is not important. You select such a tiny problem. It doesn't matter whether you publish something on that topic or not. Or the problem is too specific and clearly does not lead to transferable knowledge. For instance, let me give you an example. You might write, it is a considerable problem to press the left door of Mercedes car in the color blue. Okay, so if this is the problem, there is no transferable knowledge. It's a very specific problem. So you have to make the introduction clear that the problem you are considering is an interesting problem. Then the second part comes, analysis of existing work. That's your literature survey. Here, the reviewer may comment, the claimed knowledge gap does not exist. So you are looking for a gap so that you can justify the research. And if you cannot find that gap, your paper is going to be rejected. You have failed to connect the stated need to the previous work. You haven't understood the existing work that you have quoted. That's a very critical point. Usually the papers go to expert reviewers, and usually those expert reviewers have a lot of papers on the subject. And if you miss those work, then you have a problem. If you miss very fundamental work, how can you find fundamental work? Those are papers with the most citations. And then the paper only represents established textbook knowledge. This is also a very common point. If you start to write a paper on deep drawing, don't explain what is deep drawing. That's textbook knowledge. And the evaluation of the previous work is not fair. So you may have some concurrency with some other work, and then you may just negatively explain their achievement. And then the most important part comes, proposal. Here, you should give your method, your theory, your procedure. The reviewer can comment that and say, just a minute, the proposal is arbitrary. So there is no specific connection to the problem. Or you have made assumptions you haven't stated, or which are untested, or which are untestable. So we can not make a theory by assuming, for instance, if you are going to make a plastic deformation process, let us come back to deep drawing and say, let's assume the material is elastic. That will not work. In that case, the paper will be rejected. Or the reviewer may say, you have oversimplified the problem. I mean, making assumptions is essential in models, but making reasonable assumptions. So you have oversimplified the problem, or the proposal is too restrictive and makes too many assumptions, or the proposal clearly won't work. The proposal is wrong. The derivation contains an error. This proposal is incomplete. It cannot reasonably be tested. So those are questions which may come up. And then the design, test, and implementation comes. Here again, the reviewer can say, oh, the test does not prove anything. The test is wrong. The test is oversimplified. The test is false. And I'm doing a little bit faster. The results and evaluation part comes. Here, the reviewer might say the results are too specific and apply only to one situation. Think about the car of a Mercedes, the left door of the Mercedes in blue. This is a very specific situation. So any forming process related to this specific product is too specific. Your interpretation of the results is wrong. So you might get a result and you interpret it so that you can support your theory, but your interpretation is absolutely not physical. You claim more than you have proved. That happens very often. So you end up with a wonderful test, and then you have a lot of results, but you read out of those results which are not there. And if that happens, the paper will be rejected, of course. Discussion and conclusions. Here, what the reviewer might negatively say is the work is incomplete. You haven't gone far enough. Or you haven't understood the context of your proposal. You made a proposal and end up with something completely different. You have missed the implications of your evaluation. You did not understood how the results affect your procedure. And then the final section, acknowledgement. Here, you should ensure that anyone who helped you in the research is recognized. That can be the financial supporters, that can be the proofreaders, that can be the typist, which we don't have anymore. Every one of us is writing the paper him or herself. Suppliers who may have provided materials free of charge. If you have paid money, you don't have to mention them. Contributions of each author. Timo showed in that respect also some information. So what you shouldn't put in the acknowledgement are personal issues. So I had one paper, I remember, where the author wrote, I'm thankful to my primary school teacher, so-and-so, because he gave me the inspiration of science and math and so on. So that does not fit very well in the acknowledgement of an archival paper. Yeah, it's a very good practice, a new practice, recent practice, to show the contributor role taxonomy for the authors. So by that, you list at the end of your paper each author and write the contribution. There is a web page which explains how to do that. So I'm not going too much in the details here. And the final thing, which is in fact the first part you write after the title, is the abstract. Write the abstract at the end of the paper. The abstract is very important. Every editor is reading this abstract, and you shouldn't write in the abstract the literature survey. That's not the purpose. Write what you have achieved. Write what is new in your paper and make it short, make it clear. Assume that the editor knows the subject. Assume that the reviewers know the subject. So if I read an abstract, I made my decision about 50% to 70% to reject the paper or not. So write it with a lot of time and preparation. Okay, so I think this slide is also very helpful to you. In this slide, what we had sent as editors-in-chief to the reviewers, what we expect from the reviewers. So if you know how the reviewers are evaluating your paper, you might write your paper in a more efficient way. So I'm not reading all of them because you will have this in the videos. I see that the video, the presentation is recorded, so you can read that in your office with time. If you get the reviewer reports, the golden rule is be polite, answer with evidence, and be thorough. Being polite is absolutely important. We have a blind review process. You don't see the reviewer. Sometimes the reviewers are harsh, but still you should remain polite. And you should answer with evidence. You should always give not your belief and say, I believe it's correct. Even if the author says, the reviewer says, oh, there is evidence in this paper that this doesn't work, you cannot say, oh, I believe it's correct. That's not enough. You have to give evidence. And you should be thorough. You should give everything in detail. So here are some statements. How we suggest how you should handle reviews. You should always start with, we agree with the referee that. So then he is happy. And then, comma, but. And then you put your own point. The referee is right to the point, out, etc. Yet. And then your criticism comes. Another possibility is, whilst we agree with the referee, so you give credit to the referee, that, and then you go with the other topic. It's true that, but. We acknowledge that our paper might have been, but. We too were disappointed by the low response rate. However, we agree that it is an important area that requires further research. We support that. We support the referee's assertion that, although, and then you can give your criticism. So that's the way how you should handle the reviewers. How do you respond to a review? There are different ways. One is shown here. You write the reviewer's comment, the editor's comment, the reviewer's comment here in the text, and then with an arrow, you show your comment. That's one way. And it's always clear what was the comment, what is the reaction of the authors. Or you write it like this, reviewer's comment, you write the comment of the reviewer, and then you write author's comment and write your comment here. Another way, which I like at most, is you make a table where the comment number is given in one column, and then you have the comment of the reviewer, and then your corrections or response to the reviewer's comment. And then if you submit the revised article, make clear what part you have revised, either by color, like here, or by making it in a different under color, like here. And in that way, you can achieve that the editor can understand what has been changed in the manuscript. Okay, issues of originality that has been also mentioned by Timo, fabrication, falsification, plagiarism. You know that there are software packages which check the overlap with other papers. not only published papers, they look also to conferences and so on. So there is now a quite strong checking mechanism, but that hasn't to do anything with checking. It's your own responsibility to be honest, to be thorough, and to give only your work and not something from somebody else. It's your responsibility. It's your character. It's the requirement of a scientist, of a researcher, to be honest, to not steal something from anyone else, and to show things as if they are your own. So it doesn't have to do with the police actions we have in the journals to check the overlaps and other papers and so on. Those are only tools, but it must be in your heart. Don't do that. Don't do that. Yeah, with that, I'm at the end of my presentation. I think I'm exactly at the time which was scheduled. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would be happy to answer questions and discuss with you these issues. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Lekaya, for your very insightful sharing as well, and Timo too. Thank you so much. I myself, I learned a lot. I learned so many things about the reviewers' comments, and then what to do with it, and the publishing some of the best practices when we are trying to publish our manuscript. So we already received right now around 30 plus questions. And then I have some questions also coming to me anonymously. And in total, we actually have like 70 plus questions, which I think we will not be able to answer all of these questions. So let me pick and choose some of these questions. And then let's see who is the best person to answer this. Okay. So let's go with the first one. We have some couple of questions regarding references. I think this can...
Hi, Johan, sorry to bother you. I think your camera is not switched on.
Oh, sorry, Sonam. Can you turn...
I just did try to do it now.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan.
Yeah, okay. So we have a couple of questions about references. Maybe this can be for Timo. Yeah, so do you have any suggestions on number of references that usually will be acceptable? And also self-citation. Do you have like numbers or percentage that you would recommend?
So there's no such thing as a fixed number, I would say. But as mentioned earlier, it's really important to only have the essential and appropriate references. And when it comes to self-citation, there's a committee on publication ethics that's called COPE. That's COPE, and they have on their web pages they have quite a number of guidelines on what is considered to be appropriate when it comes to self-citation. So I would be happy also to include this in the materials, a link to that page. And that people can really check it for themselves as well. But again, one of the most important things there are really, it should be appropriate, and it should never be only self-promotional. I think that is a very important thing to take into consideration.
Okay, so we also follow COPE with self-citations, Timo.
Apologies for this.
We also follow COPE ethics for the self-citation.
Yes, all of the journals that we publish basically adhere to the COPE guidelines when it comes to ethical questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe I can add to Timo from my point. So if I write a paper with my students, what I try to tell them, just write references which are useful for your work. So do not start with Adam and Eva citing. You should cite the fundamental references which you have used to develop your work. And if you do that, you will very quickly see that there is a finite number of references which are cited. So don't cite the friend of your professor because he will be happy. Don't cite possibly the editor. That's also something which we see a lot. People cite the editor because they think if the editor is cited in the paper, he will treat the paper much better. This is not the case. Only cite things which are related to your research work and which improve or which are the basis for your research, and not any irrelevant work. And if you do that, you end up with really a reasonable finite number of publications you can cite, which depends on the work. So you might have publications where you have 15 references. You might have publications where you have 150 publications. So it's a wide range, as Timo said. And the important thing is every publication should have a reason why you have cited it. And what I see, we call that mass publication, which you should avoid definitely. So if a young researcher writes a paper, and the first thing I see is he writes a paper, metal forming is important, and then makes a bracket and writes 1 to 15, bracket close. And that's, I mean, that's not a citation. That's an anonymous citation that shows that the author has read the paper. Congratulations. But that doesn't help the reader. So you should write, if you reference a paper. I read the paper 1 by Teknik, and he found that aluminum is a light metal. Okay? So that's important. And we use that in our work. The references should be like that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Timo. So it's not the battle of how many references that you can use for your research article. Okay, thank you. So coming to the next questions, I think this can be for both Prof. Takaya and Timo as well. So should we, when we write our research article, should we focus on our main reference only, or should we focus, let's say, on 5 or 6 references that somehow correlate with our research, but not as a whole? What would be the best approach? Focus on one or a couple of references?
Timo, if you have understood the question, please go on. I haven't understood the question very well.
No, I'm not entirely sure either. But if I understand it, if my understanding is correct, then the question is what the focus should be. And I think the focus really should be on what the researcher, what the author wants to contribute to the scientific record, to the scientific community. And I think that should be the main focus. And I doubt that the focus should be on the references. I think the references are there to support the work that has been created. And I think that would be the right way to go about, and it shouldn't be the other way around, that you focus first on the reference and then, right? So it's really, initially, it's of course important to know, right, what are the latest findings, to do that literature research. And of course, then decide whether or not you think you've done research that is publishable. So that's really the starting point. But yeah, I hope that this answers the question somewhat.
Okay, thank you, Timo. Yeah, I do think it answered the question, because it's mostly about where the focus should be. It should be like on the references, on how many that we should use, or should we really focus on what you just explained? And I think that is a very great explanation. Okay, so the next one is, can you elaborate more about short communication? What is short communication?
So short communications are really, the shorter articles that try to communicate early findings in a work. So it's sometimes it's even considered work in progress. And I mean, journals, the intention of a journal in the essence is really to communicate within the community the findings of research. And this is research in an earlier stage. So it's shorter work. It's it's really these early type of findings that are then communicated, and later it could be turned into a full research article. It could also be useful to other researchers within the community to build on as well. So I think that is the main difference.
So any researchers could decide if they want to publish short communication.
Technically, I would.
So maybe to add to Timo's point, I think there's also one group of short communications which are made for commenting other work. For instance, if I have written a paper and Timo found a mistake in the paper, he can write a short communication and say, in the paper of Tekaya, equation 3 and 4 have been wrongly derived, and because the assumption was wrong, the correct assumption is that, and if we use the correct assumption, this is the derivation. That could be a short communication. So in the past, as I was young, a student, there were a lot of such short communications because people were not traveling as much as today, and they answered always by that kind of communications. So that's a group of papers which is very special. But then we have, as Timo said, also research papers that are short communications, work in progress, and or a very tiny physical invention which is made, which doesn't suffice for a whole paper. And in those short communications, we do not expect all the items in a regular paper. So you might make also only a proposal without a proof, okay, without a validation. That could be also part of a short communication.
Okay, thank you, Timo and Prof. Tekaya. So the next one, I think this can go to Prof. Tekaya. How to politely reply to reviewer if they ask us to do additional experiment, but we think that it's not necessary or we don't have time.
That's a difficult question. Let me tell you a story from one of my papers. As I was a young researcher, I made work in biomechanics, and we analyzed the skull of a young boy. So we made a tomography of the skull and wrote the paper, and then the reviewer wrote back and said, it's not enough to make a vertical skull scan, you have to make also a horizontal scan. And but we received that review after 1.5 years. And the young boy who we analyzed was meanwhile 3 years older, okay? So his skull was completely different. So I wrote back to the reviewer very politely, we cannot do that because the boy grew up. And then he wrote, that's impossible. How can you not do what I said? And he rejected the paper. Okay, so it's a difficult question. But if you say, I have no time, that's not a good idea. A paper needs time. Nobody can have a time schedule and say, I need the paper tomorrow, accept it because my promotion is 2 days later. That's no argument. And it's also no argument to say, that's a lot of work, okay? Of course, research is a lot of work. You should have other arguments. You should have arguments like, even if we would do that experiment, that would bring us only this information, which is rather minor. So, and the work we have to input there is so much, so we suggest not to do that. And then you can write, but if the reviewer insists on that, of course we will do it, okay?
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Tekaya. Okay, another question is about salami slicing. So the case is, this researcher asked, if I use one big topic, like an umbrella topic, and then I produce a couple of research under this one big topic, would that be considered as salami slicing?
It's difficult to comment on this in this manner, I would say, because I don't know what necessarily the topic is, but salami slicing is basically that you produce multiple papers out of what really should be and could be covered within one paper. So it's one piece of research, and it's really sliced into all of these different articles, and one of them is submitted to this journal, another is to another, and that's considered an unethical practice, and it's very much discouraged. So all of these papers also have quite some similarities in that sense, with minor distinctions between them. And that, in short, is what is considered salami slicing. And yeah, that's just a practice that's not considered an ethical practice. But I'm sure that Professor Takai also has.
I think you explain it very well. If I understood the question, if the topic is very big and you select subtopics and publish the subtopics, that's not salami slicing. Every topic should be consistent in itself and should have some knowledge transfer. That's fine. But if you take a topic and only bring at every paper one or two new figures, one or two new results, that's salami slicing. So if you think you have in the paper probably 20 figures and tables, and then you write a new paper with 18 figures from the old paper, or even 5 figures from the old paper, and bring some very few new figures and results, that would be salami slicing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we can only have 2 more questions to be answered because we do have time limitations here. So let me go with this one. How many times author usually given the opportunity to improve the article from reviewer's comment? Because previously I had revised the manuscript twice, but after that it was rejected by the editor because of the novelty issue.
Okay, so it's an interesting question. I think in general, my recommendation is always that we limit the number of times that a paper can go for a revision round. But of course, there are loads and loads of journals out there, and with different editors, with different preferences, and with different ways of working. So it's very well possible. I've seen papers in certain journals that have gone for 9 revision rounds. Personally, I don't think that is something that makes the editor happy, that makes the author happy, and makes the reviewers happy, right? So in general, my recommendation is always to try and keep it to a minimum. And in my experience, I think if a paper is not ready to be accepted after 2 revisions, then ideally, I think it should be rejected.
Okay, thank you, Timo. Okay, so last questions that we have. If a study is using a traditional method but never been published before, can that method be said to be a new one? So it's already it's already known maybe by local communities, but it's never been published. So can it be stated as a new method?
I have to be careful. If it is not published, so it cannot be known. But if it has published and it is used in another field for another product, that's not original. That's just an application of the known knowledge. But I mean, if you, for instance, discover in the antique Greece or in other parts of the world, a methodology to make, for instance, a forming process, which is known for thousands of years in that country and has been never published scientifically, then it's new, of course. That's something new. But if you use something which is known by everyone, then it must be published in textbooks or in seminars somewhere, then it's not new.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kaya. Okay, so I think we come to the end of our discussion session, Professor Kaya and also Timo. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think not only from your explanations, but during this session, we learned a lot. Yeah, we have answered not all questions, because again, if we answer all, it will be until tomorrow. We will not stop this session. Yeah, so for that, again, thank you so much. I believe everyone learned a lot. Yeah, and apology for participants here, because we don't have enough time to answer everyone's questions. But hopefully, this session we have both from Timo and also Prof. Kaya. They are really beneficial for all of you. So again, thank you, Prof. Kaya. Thank you, Timo. Okay, so for participants, yeah, we are coming to the end of this session. But before I end our webinar, I would like to ask you to fill in our post-event survey, and also how to download e-certificates that we have provided. So for that, let me share my screen. Okay, so first we do have our post-event survey. Yeah, and this is the link and also the QR code. So you can just scan the QR code to answer some of our post-event survey. We would really appreciate your opinions, your comments, yeah, so we can provide better session next time. Yeah, my colleague, yeah, Sonam also already put the link in the chat. Yeah, so if you just go to chat, you can see the links also available right there. This link will be available and will be shared with you also after this session ends. Okay, so this is for our post-event survey. The next one, yeah, if you want to screenshot this, feel free to do that as well to make it easier for you to answer after this session. Yeah. Okay, so for the next one is how you download e-certificate that we have provided. So to download your certificate, you can use this link. Yeah, it's bit.ly/elcbits. Yeah, or you can also scan the QR code. Okay, and after you go to this link, or after you scan the QR code, you will be asked to answer, if I'm not mistaken, 5 or 6 multiple choice questions. Yeah, so very simple questions. And after that, you will be directed to this page. Yeah. And please fill in this workshop code. Yeah, so the workshop code is IKNRROU. Yeah, so IKNROU. Okay. After you fill in the workshop code, just click submit. Yeah, and then you will be able to download your certificate. Yeah. However, if you click submit and then you will, and then this page right here pop up, you will be asked to register. Yeah, or to sign in, yeah, for Elsevier ID. You can use institutional email, or you can use your personal email as well. Yeah, please do sign in first, because we will need to know your first and last name. Yeah, after you sign in, then you will be able to download your certificate. Yeah, so it's very easy. Just go to this link or scan the QR code. Yeah, answer a couple of questions, put in the workshop code, and then that's it. Yeah, it will be downloaded to your device. Yeah, we will also send this information to you after this session. Yeah, so if you don't have time to do it now, it's fine. Yeah, you can just screenshot, or later on, we will also share this information to your registered email account. Okay, so once again, thank you so much for everyone joining us this afternoon. Yeah, thank you so much for IPS. Yeah, thank you so much for Timo and also Prof. Kaya. Once again, thank you. Yeah. Hopefully you can fly here very soon to Indonesia. Yeah, it will be such a pleasure if we can meet face to face.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, thank you so much for all attendees. Yeah, for all the committees. Yeah, and then we will see you again in our next event.